All right, in this video we'll be talking about demand characteristics and social desirability. Demand characteristics are aspects of the study that induce participants to change their behavior to do what they think the experimenter expects them to do. So when you have demand characteristics, the problem is you might not be studying what your independent variable's influence is on the dependent variable. What you may actually be studying is how the participants think that they're supposed to be behaving. So here's an example of a demand characteristic problem. If you have participants take a test in a quiet room and the same test in a loud room, they're going to be kind of suspicious about why they're taking this test twice, and they're going to think to themselves, okay, it was quiet the last time and it was loud this time. I bet I'm supposed to do worse this time. And so they might actually do worse, not because the loud room is a more difficult environment for taking a test, but because that's what they think you want. A very famous example of a demand characteristic is the clever Hans story. So Hans was a horse in the early 1900s, and his trainer said that Hans could read and do math and know what day of the week it was and all of that kind of stuff. And so his trainer would ask Hans, what's 7 minus 3? And Hans would paw onto the ground 4 times. Or his trainer would say, if it was a Thursday, his trainer would say, what day of the week is it? And Hans would paw on the ground for the number of days of the week. So Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, he would paw 4 times. Or if it was a Friday, he would paw 5 times or whatever. And a psychologist came and watched what was happening and figured out that Hans, of course, had no idea what day of the week it was or what 11 times 2 was, but Hans was watching his trainer. And his trainer unconsciously was giving off very clear signals to Hans about when Hans should stop pawing the ground. And so Hans was watching his trainer knew the answer, and when Hans would paw for the last time, the trainer's behavior would change, and Hans would know that's when he should stop pawing the ground. So Hans was experiencing demand characteristics. He knew what his trainer expected of him, and he was doing what his trainer expected. How do you know if you might have a problem with demand characteristics? Well, can the participants figure out what you think should happen? And if the participants can figure that out, you're going to have a problem with demand characteristics. Social desirability is the interest in behaving and answering questions in ways that are culturally acceptable. So we all are bound by cultural norms, and if you ask participants to violate those cultural norms, you're going to be running into social desirability problems. So, for example, if you ask your participants about their sexual habits, it's very likely that they're going to lie, because we as a culture are not really comfortable discussing our sexual habits with people. And so I'm not going to be truthful about things like that because I might be embarrassed and I might not want people to know what my sexual habits are. A classic example is if you're doing a helping study and you want to see if participants will help a stranger. And if the participants know that they're supposed to be in a study and they know that you're watching them and there's a situation when they might or might not be helping a stranger, they're going to help that stranger because it's very taboo to not help somebody who needs help, and so they're going to help the stranger. So how do you know if you have a problem with social desirability? First, are you asking participants about taboo or socially unacceptable subjects, or are you asking them to do something that's not socially acceptable? So the distinction between demand characteristics and social desirability is that demand characteristics is, can the participant figure out what you want? And social desirability is, are you asking participants to do or say something that violates cultural norms? So here's our first example to work through. When you're ready, unpause the video. So first, let's talk about demand characteristics. Demand characteristics are when the participant can figure out what's going on in the study. And the researcher is asking the participant about texting behavior and then assessing the participant's gender. So it's unlikely that the participant is going to somehow be able to figure out that his or her gender is going to be what the researcher is looking for, and so the participant is not going to really be able to figure out which direction to put his or her answers. So demand characteristics are not going to be a problem. So let's talk about social desirability. Social desirability is when you're asking people to do or say something that goes against cultural norms. And driving and texting is not something that is really socially acceptable. A lot of people know that it's very bad and that it can cause accidents, and so they might not be truthful about how much they drive while texting. So in this study, this researcher is likely to have a problem with social desirability. She's asking about a behavior that participants are likely to lie about. Here's the second example. Unpause the video when you're ready. So first is demand characteristics. Are the participants behaving in a way differently just because they're in a study? And what he's finding is that no matter what, whenever he's observing the students are having high engagement. So what's likely is happening is the students know that he's observing them, and are changing their behavior just because he's there. Social desirability is there something that he's asking his participants to do that is socially unacceptable? And he's not really asking anything like that. So in this study, the researcher has a problem with demand characteristics. In the third example, I want you to, as always, unpause the video when you're ready to talk about it. So in this example, the participants are totally unknowing. They have no idea that they're in a study. And if they have no idea that they're in a study, they can't be experiencing demand characteristics, nor can they be experiencing social desirability. He's just in a room watching the footage from these cameras. So he's watching natural behavior. So the participants don't know they're in a study, so they can't experience demand characteristics. And they're not going to be behaving in ways that are culturally acceptable just because they know somebody's watching, because they don't know somebody's watching. So the researcher actually doesn't have a problem with either demand characteristics or social desirability in this study. So here's our last example. Unpause it when you're ready. So in this example, the researcher doesn't really have a hypothesis. There's nothing to say what he is expecting the parents to say. And the parents aren't going to behave differently just because they're in a study, because they're not actually doing anything. They're just answering questions. So the researcher isn't going to have a problem with demand characteristics. For social desirability, it's not very socially acceptable for parents to say, my kid makes me angry and I want to get away from my kid. So this researcher is going to have a problem with social desirability because he's asking parents to talk about something that's really not very socially acceptable. And that's it. As always, please, please, please don't feel that this is the end of your learning about this topic. And if you need more help, please, please do get it.